Oral history with Roman Kohler. Am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes.
Okay. And today's date is January 21st, 2004. And this is an oral history for the Maria Rogers Oral History Program at the Carnegie Library, and also for the Rocky Flats Cold War Museum. And my name is Dorothy Charlie. Well, Roman, as I promised you, the first question is, when and where were you born?
Well, I was born in 1940 in a little town, West Bend, Wisconsin. It was a small farm that my family had there, and that is where I grew up. Spent the first 21 years there on the farm, going to the school, elementary schools there, and as well as the high schools there in West Bend.
Were you one of many children?
I have two brothers, so there are just three of us boys in a small farm family. We had a what was known as a family farm. It was not a large producing farm. More or less, the animals and crops was mostly for family use.
And your father and your mother both worked on it?
Yes, absolutely. Wasn't large enough to support us, so Dad worked outside the home also.
And what did he do?
He was a factory worker. He was a factory worker there in the local community. I moved with my family from Wisconsin to Colorado in 1965. Looking for a drier climate for my wife at the time to assist her allergies.
I see. Now, you had not been in the service?
I have not been in the service, that is correct.
And had you worked in Wisconsin before you moved up?
Yes, I did. I worked in several different manufacturing plants there in Wisconsin. I came to Colorado in '65. I again sought an industrial job. I was working as a welder. I went from that job to a machinist job. A friend of mine that was working with me had moved on to Rocky Flats. That was in 1967, when he got a job at Rocky Flats, and he came back to the factory and kind of recruited me and encouraged me to, put in an application, which I did.
What factory was that?
I worked at a plant called Precision Engineering Company.
And you were a welder?
I was a welder and a machinist at that small plant, yes. As I said, I filled out an application at that time. It was encouraged that we wait for our security clearance to be processed before even being hired in at the plant at Rocky Flats, which I did. I had applied for a drafting job out there, but that's not what they were hiring for. They were hiring machinists. They said, well, we've got a better opportunity, better starting wages as a machinist, so I did accept employment there as a journeyman machinist. That was in 1968.
60. And you were in the process of getting clearance when you started work?
No, my clearance had already been processed. So I did have the Q secret clearance
So
when I was hired.
About how long?
That took approximately 3 months at that time. Security clearances were an interesting situation for me and friends, I guess, because when someone from the federal government come around and ask questions about me and about prospective employees, why they always kind of wonder what's going on. What did this individual do to be investigated like that? But it was a thorough investigation of all the friends and relatives that I had put in my application, as well as went back to my schools. So they did have a pretty clear picture.
They talked to people that you knew that you hadn't given as references.
Yes, I think that they did bridge out. In other words, they started out with references and then went on from there. That seemed to be the process. And at that time, depending on how mobile an individual was, a clearance took anywhere from 2 to 3 months.
Well, can you recollect, first of all, can you recollect being interviewed for the job, and you know, what was that like, if you can remember?
Well, the interviews were pretty standard for any industrial plant, I believe. They didn't tell us a whole lot. The interviewers from employment did not tell us a whole lot about the workings of the plant, other than the fact that it was a defense plant, and that you did work with some nuclear materials. But they did not go into really great detail at that time, not as far as the hiring interview.
And did you know, I mean, did you know what they were making?
Actually, I did not. I did not know very much about it. The secrecy was very strong at that particular time in our political environment. You know, that was a time when, you know, it was the big conflicts between the U.S. and Russia. It's I kind of related as saber rattling by the various leaderships, you know, and a lot of posturing going on. So secrecy was very prominent with the defense industry.
What do you think led you to take the job?
Well, at the time it was mostly for more pay and better benefits, and this is what my friend had you know, really promoted for me, to me, that it would expand my own abilities. Said it's a good place to work and steady work, you know, and it was better opportunities at the Rocky Flats plant than at the my present employment there at Precision Engineering. So it was, I looked at it as an advancement, another move up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, can you remember what your first days of work were like?
It was very interesting, of course, going into an area that had, I went from a very small shop to a very large shop, machine shop, that had a lot of new equipment, equipment that I had not, you know, previously operated. I had enough confidence that I really wasn't too worried about that, but it wasn't too difficult, or because the individuals that I interfaced with were very helpful, from the supervisors right through the workers. They were all very helpful
Did you start
to get going.
In what building did you start?
I started in building 444, working with stainless as well material as well as uranium material.
Can you describe a little bit for people who might not know what building 444 was for? I mean, was it on the coal side or the coal hot side, or what?
Well, it was, as they referred to as a cold side, the coal being plutonium work. The hot side, of course, was the plutonium operations, working with plutonium metal. The cold side, we worked with stainless steels, various other metals, uranium, as I mentioned. That was uranium and beryllium were the two other products that were being machined in building 444. It was all component production.
So you didn't find the work too difficult?
No, I did not. Did not find it difficult. With the help of the other employees, I think the training programs out there were excellent. They did put a lot of effort into bringing new employees online very adequately, and so that we could, learn the new operations, working with new metals. There was quite a bit of training. In fact, the first 60 days of employment, of course, was all training, and they put you to work right away, and working with someone else rather than working on your own. As with many manufacturing plants, the first 60 days, of course, was probationary period under the union contract. You started out on a day shift, but by union rules, if someone wished to change shifts, they could always bump an individual that was on a shift that they wanted. New employee, of course, has no seniority. You're on days for 60 days. When your 60 days are up and your probationary period's over, someone on a night shift would undoubtedly bump you, and you would wind up, they would come on days and you'd have to go to the night shift.
Oh, I see.
That was a regular routine.
That was a routine, but they would start you on days.
They would start you on days for your training and probationary period, yes.
I see. Uh-huh. But then other people that wanted to get on days that were on nights would bump you.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. We had a fairly large workforce at that time, and I can't even remember how many were on the shifts, but in Building 444, they were running 3 shifts of production. So
that was the time of high production.
It was, yes. In the late 60s and 70s, yes. That was.
How did you feel about the union at that time? Did you
I've been familiar with
the union, right?
Yes,
was it a union shop, or?
Yes, it was a union shop. I was very familiar with unions. That was something that I was in the union prior to that, a different union. When I was working in Wisconsin, the shops there also were unionized. So working under a union leadership was part of normal operations for a blue-collar worker.
Did you ever work with the union? I mean, do work with the union as a steward or anything like that sort?
No, I did not. I did volunteer for some of the other activities, and attending union meetings and that sort of thing, but I was never on the union leadership roles.
How did, now I have a sense that you did a lot of different jobs. You want to just kind of go through the progression?
Okay, certainly. And when I went to night shift, I did wind up changing buildings because at that particular time, 1968, they had moved an operation from Albuquerque to Rocky Flats. It was what that's called then as stainless steel J-line component parts. That operation was moved into building 881.
J-line, what does that mean? Is it?
It was just a tag name they put on a group of stainless steel component parts. And that, I don't know what went into that insignia there. I was one of 3 machinists that started working J-line, the stainless steel parts, in building 881 on a night shift. So I was in 81 on a night shift, pretty much by ourselves. Large building, there's only a few of us there on the night shift. Gave me an opportunity to, during breaks, lunches, to rove around the building and kind of familiarize myself with it. As you know, at that particular time, in 1969, is when they had the fire out there at Rocky Flats. I was working night shift at that time in 81. It was at the time of the fire. I wasn't there at the time of the fire. The fire happened on a weekend, of course. I know I was in a carpool coming to work Monday morning. We were rather apprehensive. We didn't know whether we had a job or not. That was part of the conversation in the carpool, wondering what it's going to be like.
Did you know, you'd heard on the Sunday, the day before, about
Yes.
the fire?
Yes, we'd heard on the news about the fire. Of course, news reports were rather sketchy. As I said, we were all rather apprehensive of what it's going to be like, though all of us were working in other buildings other than where the fire was at. So it was, when we went in, it was work as normal. Everything was as usual, except that within a few days after the fire, an awful lot of organization was put into place for a very rapid cleanup. As I say, at that time, working a PM shift, I went from 81 to 44, and along with many others, we were all pressed into the cleanup operations.
Within a few days?
Well, actually, my turn didn't come for probably a few months, but everyone was certainly informed that it didn't make any difference whether you were hourly or salary, what group you were in, unless you were in some sort of a protected group that could not be released. Everyone would be asked to take their turn in helping with the cleanup.
How did that work? There must have been some people in management that weren't too happy about that.
I'm sure there were. I'm sure there were, but at the time, I think we were all pretty much dedicated to what our jobs were, in that we were working for a defense plant, and this was, an unusual situation. It could only depend on the workers that were there to do that type of work. Therefore, we accepted that. There was a strong feeling of responsibility by the workers, and when I first started work out there, I took notice that many of the workers were ex-military individuals. They had served some time, whether it be simply in the Army or Navy, but they've been into Vietnam, Korea, and various other conflicts. And these workers felt like working for a defense plant was like an extension of their military service. They were still performing to the defense of their country, working for the government. In fact, it was even so strong that the union would, at times during negotiations, propose to the management that they be treated the same as civil service employees, get the same benefits, holidays off, that sort of thing, although that never carried. We never got that. But
so that was a cross from blue collar to management, that feeling of...
Yes, absolutely. It was very strong. I won't say that the workers were warmongers or anything like that. Not at all. I think everyone, to an individual, felt that this was a defense posture that we were working with. It was not our product was not to be used as an aggressive device in any form. This was something this was a big stick to have in your back pocket and then never bring out. That's what it was. As I was talking about the fire, when it came my turn to go over and work in the area that had been burnt, it was a rather interesting experience. It was very surprising. I had never been in those buildings previously, so I had no knowledge of how the glove box systems work, what it looked like. Going in to the burnout area on a night shift, all dressed up in the protective gear that was provided for us, wearing gas masks, old military type gas masks, going into an area that's been burnt, and there's nothing but trouble lights to work with. It was rather interesting, and I spent 30 days as part of the cleanup on a night shift. I worked a 5-day non-rotating shift, which means you work 5 days in a row. It didn't make any difference whether it was Monday through Friday, Tuesday through Thursday, whatever. You know, it rotated.
And you had to suit up, right? And
Yes.
to do the work, you always had to get into all the protective.
Yes, we had several layers of coveralls, plastic booties over our shoes. Everything was taped up. All seams were taped up. You know, where your coveralls were buttoned, as well as the plastic booties taped around your legs, gloves taped to your arms, your sleeves, so that radiation or dust could not, you know, get to your body.
Was that your first experience being suited up?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. It was, to think back at it, and it was absolutely amazing. But the number of workers were in there, the type of work we were doing, spraying walls with water to wash them down, crawling up into the upper structure of the rooms, into the heating ducts and everything to clean them up, scrub them down, and clean them up. It's amazing that no one was killed. We had minor injuries, and that's all. But you know, individuals had to climb on top of the glove boxes. We used ladders and some scaffolding. But I think everybody worked with a real purpose at that time. They knew it had to be done, and you know, they did it in a, you know, very respectable, safe manner.
And now, did the union, the hourly workers, work side by side with the managers?
Yes, they did.
They really
Yes, they did. It made no difference at that particular time. When you're all suited up, you couldn't tell anyhow.
Do you think that had any effect on some of the managers in terms of helping them understand more what?
Possibly. I can't say that, you know, whether I really noticed a whole lot, you know, at that particular time. We all just did our job. As I was saying, secrecy was very strong out there. That was, you know, part of the everyday business. You could not expand on your job with other people. It was the key words were, does the other person you're talking to have a need to know what your job is or what you're doing? We have family members, brothers who worked on one side of the plant to the other. When they would talk to each other about their jobs, they would be very general. They would not get in specifics because the secrecy of the detail of what each were doing was definitely, you know, ingrained as part of their training, of each individual's training out there, to keep our nation's secrets about nuclear energy and nuclear weapons.
What impact did that have on you personally?
It was, I think it was rather uplifting to the fact that, you know, I'd been through a security clearance process, and I was being entrusted with keeping secret information that was being, you know, provided for me as far as, you know, national security information. And I believe most of the other workers felt the same way because they were very strong about that. It was not uncommon to be in a conversation, you know, if you're asking somebody, well, what'd you do today, or what are you working on there? And the individual would simply say, do you have a need to know? If not, I'm not going to tell you. When we'd have visitors through, we would be encouraged by security to challenge visitors, when they asked about your job, to first find out if they really had a need to know the detail of what you were doing. And if they didn't have a need to know, you didn't tell them. And that carried through, at home. As I can say, many people now, will go to their graves, carrying the details of the work they did as part of their security agreement.
How do you think your wife felt about it?
It was part of the everyday, thing. It was part of the job. And we explained, this is it. This is part of our security. As I said, we had received many security briefings at the plant, as well as part of our training. So we were all felt the same way about that.
And did that, I presume, you mentioned you carpooled.
Mm-hmm.
The same rules apply to it?
Absolutely. The same rules applied there. You might talk very general terms, about what you were doing at any one day, but never in detail. Never in detail. It never divulged, the things that we were entrusted with.
Now, you understand the reasons for that. Do you think there were ever problems that came up at the plant because of the high security, high secrecy?
We never really felt as though, we had problems with that. And it seems as though the community was, at that time, was very much behind it. In fact, when I started out there, I know I got the impression that many of the businesses in the community were happy to, do business with a Rocky Flats worker because they knew they were trustworthy. They've already been, through a security clearance process, and they accepted that. They accepted that. So that was, I guess, to our benefit.
Now, did that change over time in your experience?
The security, I don't believe the security aspect changed. Of course, there was the environment of the political environment of the anti-war activists. We should not be building weapons of mass destruction like that. That did start, and it became very strong. I don't believe there was a whole lot of animosity to the demonstrators that came to Rocky Flats from the workers, although we certainly felt as though our viewpoint should be heard. Rocky Flats did a lot of other things too. We had other contracts besides doing strictly work for weapons type work. We had some other contracts, during that I guess strong period of time when there was a lot of demonstrations against building nuclear weapons. We were also involved in some research and development for peaceful use of nuclear weapons, or with nuclear energy.
Were you yourself involved with that?
A little. We had done, because of the technologies that was available at the plant, they had gotten contracts to work with laser fusion projects. This was to create electricity through other forms using seawater. And at that time also, in Colorado here, they even exploded a nuclear device, the Rulison Project, to release natural gas that was entrapped deep in the Rio Blanco area.
Oh, now when was that?
Oh, I don't remember exactly what year that was.
But that was related to things.
It was related to more peaceful use I remember seeing bumper stickers on various cars, you know, to let the peaceniks, you know, if they do not support the nuclear energy, let them freeze to death in the dark. You know, because...
Did you see those bumper stickers at Rocky Flats?
No, actually they were around town. They were not distributed by Rocky Flats. I'm not sure who distributed them, but they certainly were around. Let's say we're involved in many other things, and there was, and they did try to promote various usage of, you know, for nuclear energy, and I believe that was probably in the mid-70s when that was going on.
And you know, some people have said that the '69 fire kind of brought more attention to Rocky Flats because the media started focusing more attention on it. Is that your view?
Absolutely. Yes, it was. You know, certainly there were many articles in the paper at that time. I myself was interviewed shortly after had one of the newer buildings out there, building 707, was constructed. I was working up there as a machinist, and there was one of the TV stations was running a series of interviews and programs on people with dangerous jobs, and they did come out and interviewed a few of us workers out there, and asking us questions, you know, whether we felt our jobs were dangerous and our feelings on that. Sad to say that many of my answers were left on the cutting room floor. And it was probably in that particular time it was an avenue for the reporter to do their own take on that particular work out at Rocky Flats.
But you did appear on...
I did. Yes, I did.
Do you remember what your own reaction to the piece was?
My reaction to the piece was, that's not really the way I, you know, I did the interview. Like I say, it left an awful lot out. We had probably a 30-minute interview, and when it got to TV, why, it was probably less than a minute. You know, it was very, very short. Although there again, as the workers, you know, it was still very strong secrecy about the work we were doing, so therefore you just shrugged it off, and they say, well, if the public is out there chasing incorrect information, let them do it, because at that particular time, if they're, you know, if they're looking in the wrong direction for something, why at least your security is not being jeopardized. And that was part of the security training we received. In other words, you don't say anything about your job, and if somebody asks questions and they seem to have an incorrect take on what is going on, just let that happen. Don't answer the questions, don't correct a misstatement, because you could very easily be divulging, you know, critical information if you did correct an incorrect statement.
So you were actually trained to do that?
Yes, that was all part of our indoctrination, our instructions on security.
Was that frustrating to you? Did you have any experience with that?
Yes, it was. You're right. That is probably, that was prevalent with most of the workers. It was frustrating that, you know, so many people did have a misconception of that we were actually doing something beneficial. And it was almost more than a job. Most of the people, you know, I'd say had an awful lot of pride in what they were doing. And of course they had to be pride in the fact that they were doing a job as carefully and as accurately as possible. You know, doing a job right was very important. You know, in that industry, you can't sell a factory second. you know, it had to be right the first time, and anything you're going to put out there, you know, if someone wanted to, you know, fire a gun, they want to make sure it goes bang and not pop. So I think all the workers did have an awful lot of pride in that. And
So you were saying you worked in 707.
yes, I did.
Was that right after the fire then?
Yes, actually, it was right after the fire. I worked in 76 building. As soon as they had it cleaned up and started production again, I was you know, pressed into service right there. From the cleanup, I just moved to, you know, a short distance down the hall into you know, one of the areas where they had started machines up again, and I was running machining plutonium there, you know, on a night shift.
So you moved from the cleanup in 76.
Mm-hmm.
The fire was all in 76.
76 and 77, yes, those two buildings. I was doing cleanup actually in 77 building, although, you know, you go from one to the other and never even know if you've moved.
Is that
Excuse me.
because they're close together? Can you
Yes, they were
explain that a little
connected.
bit?
They were connected. They're just like going from one room to the other without even going, you know, opening a door. They were connected. But, and that was my first experience of working with plutonium metal. Certainly we had an awful lot of respect for working with that metal. It was pyrophoric, which means it would, you know, easily catch fire.
Now, in the building 707, that was close by then?
Yeah, 707 was built, you know, right at, I'm trying to remember exactly when that was. It was shortly after the fire. They had built 707 and used the, you know, the experiences they had learned because of the fire and that to design the 707. So that to prevent that type of things from ever happening again. In the early days, the glove box lines in 76 were not inerted. We just had positive airflows.
Can you explain what that means?
Well,
inerted?
Inerted is when they would put in a gas, argon gas, into the, or it wasn't even argon, it's another form of gas, into the glove box lines, which would retard any fires from happening. In the early days before they did that, as I said, there was just a negative airflow, or positive airflow, you know, it was negative to the outside. But it was easy enough to start a fire with, you know, the pyrophoric material. We would have to keep the chips that we were cutting covered with a chilled oil that we were using to, you know, to prevent any fires from occurring. It
Now,
was
physically, how did you keep that covered?
well, as we're machining the product, we would have just like regular garden hoses that we're pumping oil through, and you put that right onto the point of the tool, and as the chip was coming off, and you would only cut the metal to a point where you could keep that metal completely covered in oil. There was a pan there, the chips would fall into that pan, there's oil in that pan, and you keep it all covered until such time as you're done, and then you take the chips out and, you know, send them for further processing. As long as you followed the procedures, there was no danger. You know, there was really did not have much in the way of you know, fires. It looked like fire coming off as you were cutting material, but you know, you had everything under control.
Was it different for you to start working with plutonium? And did it feel different to you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It was totally different than the working on regular steels that I had in the past.
Even though you had been working in the other building with uranium?
Yes,
But this was
because the
still-
uranium was depleted uranium, so it had been processed to the point where it was not, as radioactive as plutonium was. Therefore, it could be handled in the open. Working with the plutonium, you're working inside of a glove box wearing heavy leaded gloves. That in itself was an experience, learning how to manipulate tools, pick up things with wearing a very heavy rubberized leaded glove. It was just simply techniques you learned. But it was interesting. I moved around to quite a few different jobs out there, from machining plutonium to working again with the steels. There was a lot of opportunities out there at Rocky Flats. They very much encouraged people to advance themselves. As with other industries, there was a reimbursement, education reimbursement for if you wanted to go on to school. There was, an awful lot of effort in encouraging employees to come up with new ideas and ways of doing their work. There were a lot of awards given out, and therefore we have quite a few people that had were contributors to new processes and trademark activities or trademark things that they had done. A lot of awards given out for doing that. It was encouraged with every contractor, whether it was Dow Chemical, who was the first contractor that I worked with out there, to Rockwell Engineering, to EG&G. They were all, encouraged the employees to advance themselves as well as advance the work they were, the activities that they were involved in. This, like I say, it provided myself with
So you took
advancement.
you took advantage of that?
I took advantage of that. I had applied for a toolmaker's apprenticeship program out there. I did go through that toolmaker's apprenticeship program, and at that time I also did started evening classes at community college. And
Had you had any college before?
no, I did not. But it was through the the opportunities out there that I was able to upgrade my own capabilities, moved on from that hourly work as a tool maker into management as a shop supervisor, and
So now, how
Up
did
from
that
there.
happen? Did you did you go on to get a degree?
yes, I had an associate degree. I had you could change jobs by applying. They had bid jobs that they put notices on the bulletin boards for, and of course I bid on supervisor's job, which is very close to, the type of things I was knowledgeable in, is working as a tool and die maker, and just moved up from there. Had many opportunities afforded to me, and I was able to, move into a much higher level, management positions from there.
Can you remember, was there one particular point where you tried for a supervisor's job and got it, and was there a point at which you made a big move?
Yes, that was more or less offered some very large steps up. I had, working as a shop supervisor, I had moved to another, an engineering job with manufacturing support, and I'd only been in that department for a year when the manager there decided to retire. And they asked me to take his position while they went out and see if they could recruit another manager for that department. They didn't come up, I guess, with somebody they felt that was different than what they already had, and so I kept the job permanently. I went from,
That was a big step.
that was a big step there, and
Was that the point at which you moved from hourly to salary?
no, I'd been salaried for a couple of years then.
You became salaried at Rocky Flats when you became a supervisor?
That's correct. That's correct. And I had several steps up from there, had other opportunities provided to me, when there's other changes, took place out there, and when supervisors retired or moved on, there's other opportunities that I was offered. I was building manager and operations manager for building 883 for a number of years.
What was that building like?
That building was the rolling and forming operations out there. They rolled out metal, various metals, and much of it was uranium, and formed them with punch presses and that. We had the Department of Defense contract in some of the work we did out there that I was involved in. It was a very special project. It was not actually related to the nuclear weapons at all. It was a separate contract. It was a rather big job. I had 100 hourly workers, 7 foremen, 2 managers that all worked directly for me in that building. And we were working, 3 shifts a day, 6 days a week.
But that was unrelated to the production of the nuclear
That's correct.
triggers.
That's correct. We did, still did some work in the trigger end of things. In fact, we did a fair amount of work with that, but we did have an awful lot of our people were dedicated to this other contract.
Did you see some differences when Dow left and Rockwell took over?
Yes, there was some differences, emphasis on all types of management, be the way you'd describe it.
Now, you were already a manager, is that right?
No, I was hourly when when Rockwell took over from Dow. I did not become a manager or a supervisor. I think it was under the Rockwell at that time, after they'd been in operation for a while. As I mentioned, the first 13 years I had out there was hourly, and then 14 years as salary. And yeah, with each new contractor, there was emphasis on different things. It seemed like as a new contractor came in, they said, well, we're new here because you weren't doing well, or at least the management wasn't doing well with the previous contractor, therefore we have to do everything different. And there was some joking about reinventing the wheel with every new contractor.
From what you knew of the causes of the fire, did you feel that there might have been some things that could have been done differently?
I can't say as I really do. It took a long time for them to really determine exactly what the cause was. I really couldn't say, whether, I'm sure if something could have been done, that might have prevented it. But at the time, I don't believe the workers really realized what could have happened. That anything that they had done would have precipitated that. I think they were just doing their jobs as they normally had. Just an unfortunate situation.
But there were changes that were made.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There was a lot of changes made, an awful lot of emphasis on safety. And that's always been the situation out there. We've never had a criticality incident while working with you know, the radioactive material, even though there are various other facilities, you know, that had. But it was because of the amount of extensive safety training each individual, each department had. And it was on a continuous basis. You know, we had safety meetings every single week. And there was, you know, posters, we had movies, and various other presentations on safety.
Did you ever have an experience yourself that where you felt it was close to a criticality, or where you felt in real danger?
Never. Never. As I say, our training, I think, was adequate to the point where we respected the material as you would respect any type of dangerous material. But we knew what we were doing. The workers were well trained, not only in the actual operations of the job, but with all the safety aspects of it. You know, we were provided with enough information to know that by keeping, you know, the metals separated, and by following the procedures that were outlined for us, we would never have an incident. That the procedures were at such a degree that you know, we would never collect enough material to have a criticality accident. As well as if you follow the procedures, you wouldn't have a fire. You know, and as well as personal injuries. You know, cuts, abrasions, you know, falls, that sort of thing. There was, you know, extreme amount of training, time spent with workers at all levels, whether from the office right down to the individual sweeping the floors. There was a tremendous amount of effort put into safety training out there.
How was it for you moving from an hourly, being union, you know, a member of the union and hourly work, to moving to a salaried position? Was that a big step?
It's certainly it's a big step. It's a perception of how you treat other your fellow workers. At one time you were a buddy with them. Now you have to be giving them orders and expect them to follow those orders. So there's a change there. I didn't really feel personally I had a real difficult time with that. But it's something you have to prepare for. At that particular time, we had quite a bit of supervisory training, classes that we did attend for new supervisors. That they gave you information on how to carry out your job as a supervisor, how to evaluate your people, how to treat these people in different situations, you know, confrontations, so forth. We're trained on the aspects of how to address the union agreements with the hourly workers. So we had a lot of help. A person going from one position to the other did have an awful lot of help.
Now, after you were in management, do you think that your views changed with respect to the union? Sometimes, you know, people can. Well, let me just leave it there.
Well, certainly, you know, as a supervisor, you had the responsibility of carrying the management line, whatever came down from every level of management, from corporate on down. You know, that was part of your responsibility. And if it was to emphasize one thing or another, you know, different levels of safety or production, you know, some areas or managers were a little more production oriented, and they really push for production, and so it was simply your job to, you know, carry out those orders. It's, you know, part of every job. Part of every job, yeah.
there were some things that happened that generated a lot of conflict later on when they came out, such as the burials in the trenches and the, I guess also the barrels that leaked. Did you have to do with any of those?
I have to say I've never had any involvement with any of that. You know, the burying of the chips and that you know they had dug up later, that had all been done you know, without my knowledge, and some of it was probably prior to it. Working with the metals and that, we felt we were working at the very leading edge of the technology of working with those metals. We had new equipment. We felt as though we had the very best, you know, that was to offer out there. And we simply didn't know any different. Looking back on it now, of course, we say, you know, gee, you know, we really didn't, we were like babes in the woods, you know. But there again, you know, we all learn, you know, by mistakes. We all learn by, you know, as time goes on. But at that particular time, I say each level, you know, we were trained at what we felt was the latest in technology and the latest in knowledge that was available at that time. People simply didn't know how to dispose of that material. And I certainly hear stories from other facilities how they handle it, and it was different and probably a lot more dangerous to the environment than what we were doing.
Now let's see, you were there during all the big protests.
Yes.
Did you personally have any encounters with protesters?
No, I did not. We had our own little rally, you know, at that time, where we there was a group had organized a support rally, gave out T-shirts, and we had several entertainers that came out to that particular rally. It was a one-time event.
Did you participate?
I did participate in that, yes. It was fun, and that's what it was. It was a fun thing to do. It was more like entertainment, but you know, there was a meaning to it. Certainly, it was. You know, we were supporting our own efforts out there, as to let the public know that, you know, that we weren't simply sitting back and you know, to be continuously criticized. You know, that there was a need, and we were simply following our government's, you know, desires there, and you know, we're trying to do things that follow the, you know, military protection of the country.
I've heard some people, some workers say it almost felt like you were under siege with the protesters. Did you feel that way, or?
Yeah, it almost did feel that way. That's true. There was an awful lot of public relations, public sentiment that was being fostered by the protesters, and because of our security responsibilities, we could not, you know, verbally fight back, you might say. We had to keep quiet and simply accept it. And therefore, yes, there was that feeling, you know, that we're really being besieged and belittled needlessly, you know, unjustly. But it was something that we were continuously being reminded of our security responsibility, and that you could not retaliate. You just could not do it. And, I just had to accept that.
Do you remember ever feeling kind of personally angry?
No, I can't say that I really did. I tried to keep an even sentiment about that sort of thing and say, well, as long as they're out there and I'm going in a different gate and not being, deliberately, confronted with it. Certainly, the protesters were on the side of roads when we did, drive in and out of the plant, but we're cautioned not to have any interaction, and we didn't. And for the most part, I think most of the workers, that's the way it was. They simply did not participate in any interaction at all. Kept yourself safe that way, and and all the secrets safe at the same time.
Now, you were there when the FBI raid came.
Yes, I was.
Can you describe what that was like for you?
There again, that was
Just a second. I'd like to stop now and change the tape.
okay. That'd be good. I can get a